Good afternoon and welcome
皆
to this
様、こんにち
launch
は。
of the World Nuclear Industry
Ja,
Status
vi har
Report.
blivit spårända här ut till spår nummer 16, avstigning på höger sida, tågets färdriktning.
You will be able to get all the presentations afterwards. During the seminar, we will not have the chat function available, but there will be a Q&A session at the end of the seminar. But without any further ado, I would like to hand over the screen to Professor Kurokawa for introductory remarks. Professor Kurokawa, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you for this occasion and this opportunity. And Thomas, good to see you again. And when you come back again, just let's go together for lunch somewhere or dinner. And Suzuki-san, I think I met a few times recently too. And Sakiyama-san, thank you. And I enjoyed your chapter of Michael's big reports. And do you hear me now? All right. Could you, because just I presented something, but I think you remember this is the 10th year of Fukushima. So that what happened, 10th year of Fukushima, so that I have been pretty busy towards the end of this February and early March, because there have been many Zoom sessions. For example, like 2-3-day session hosted by Harvard Belfast Center, and 2-day session by UCLA and a few others. And of course, such a discussion is a global issue, so that the UK and also Europe and everywhere, people are gathering, discussing nuclear safety issue. So that I have been invited by several of these things. And because of this is a global issue of global warming and energy and other things, and Fukushima 10 years, so that my time, all the sessions, most of them sessions are starting in my time in Tokyo, 1 a.m. for 2 to 3 hours. And so I like to show this dialogue and discussion. First slide, please. All right, so this is a summary of everything. So that on the one is the Economist, you see that in early this year, Economist has a 2-page. Economist is one of my best sort of I value as a weekly journal, because they are very much fair and embracing global issues. And Lessons of Fukushima, just my name appeared once in a Fukushima issue, not a nuclear issue, and they made an issue. I think of Fukushima, what we had to learn from issue. That is the issue, and I think Lessons of Fukushima. So I was very honored to hear just my was quoted in Fukushima. What I said at that time, because such a big issue, big disaster, I made a comment apparently, and they just took that part, is, oh, this is the third opening of Japan. That was what I made a comment, but it didn't happen. Third opening, because about 150 years ago, Japan opened up Japan to the world after 2.5 centuries of the closed nation. So that I saw that then defeat by World War II, that really changed Japan again, and then made a good economic growth, but that somehow growth had stopped over that time. That's my comment, so that when Fukushima happened, I thought, oh, this could be a great opportunity for the third opening of Japan. That was a quote by Economist of early this year. And I was invited to various places for the comment because of 10 years, and go to, let's say, next slide. Now, this is Japanese economic things. Now, let's see, let me see. Hold on. Okay. Let me see. Japanese economy has been very much stagnant over last at least 20 years, and to be sure, this is 30 years. GDP went up in many countries. Up top is from 2000, this century, for 20 years, and GDP, average income, or salary of every country is rising. From top is UK and is the US, then Canada, Germany, and UK and France and Korea, and then somehow Italy was flat, and Italy was reasonably flat, but I think Japan was very, very flat. And in fact, average income per head, Korea exceeded Japan by year 2015. Not many people in Japan would not talk about it. So Japan was stagnant economy. Next slide. Now this is economist issue of recent one, which again quoted me about dementia, because I've been serving as a World Dementia Council, which is a product of G8 Summit hosted by David Cameron, because they recognize dementia is one of the biggest issues of our time. And they invited me to join this one. Now, after 7 years of run, I now elected to become a vice chair of this World Economic Forum and also G8 Summit promise. Next slide. No, this is the Fukushima, which they quoted me. I'm saying this is the third opening of Japan. So taking this Fukushima as an impetus to make Japan to change to more like global economy. Next slide. Now this, I think, then happened with the corona. This started almost 2 years ago in Wuhan, China, but spread out to the world. So it's become a pandemic of once in a century. Last one was in World War I time of flu epidemics, and this is another pandemic. Now, if you see in this connected world, you can see what kind of results in response to pandemic, corona pandemic, and I think I begin to see the cause of death of different countries. You know, just I think they have some sort of death certificate, and I think there may be certain the differences and nuance in the cause of death. But apparently, if you see the US, number one cause of death over the last almost 3.5 was corona. And that is the reason this is a big issue in the US. Number two is coronary heart disease, which is the number one killer in the US. Next slide. UK, again, UK somehow Alzheimer's dementia is number one, coronary heart disease, but corona is number three, almost the same with this top two. So that is the reason in UK, I think corona, response to corona is a very political issue. Next slide. France, again, corona is one of the major causes of death over the last 2 years. Second to coronary heart disease, then Alzheimer's and dementia. Next slide. But Japan, very low, about maybe 20th cause of death. And so that whatever the reason, it's not much deadly issue. Next one, Korea, again, it's not a major one. Stroke and coronary heart disease is a major cause of death in this country. Next slide. Thailand, moderate, maybe about 12 or 13, and coronary heart disease and stroke, influenza, pneumonia, and top 3. Next slide. Malaysia, it's pretty killing, number 2. So there must be a lot of frustration and pressure to the government, whatever sector may be. Next slide. And India, you know, one time in India, I think the corona death is maybe 10,000 each day or so, but I think this is still It's a large number, but it's not still the top cause of death in that country. Next slide. This is China. Very few. Maybe containment and whatever the policy they might have from Wuhan have been very successful. Very strong leadership, whatever, and that is China. Next slide. Australia, very low again, about 25th cause of death over last 3 years. This is the date is this January 6th. So this is a very updated data. Next slide. And Sweden, I think Sweden, you know, earlier, Sweden, scientists advised this is one of the flu, so let's leave it as it is usually. And then all of a sudden, many people started dying so that they had a quarantine and this and that. But still, this is number 3. Next slide. Norway, quite different. So these are the next thing. Next slide. Mexico, southern part of this continent. Next slide. Brazil, both. Somehow Latin America, it is very high and top cause of death since corona pandemic. So what I'm saying to the government is whatever this pandemic is connected world, you have to follow what the other countries are doing. Vaccine is important, but whatever you do, your policy has to be really made based on these factual data in connected world. So that's my argument. So I suggested my government, you know, we have been very successful. Death rate is very low. It's not necessarily because of your policy, but somehow there's certain factors behind some, I don't know what is the thing. So maybe I like to have your some wisdom. What are the differences among these countries as a cause of death? So depending on this cause of death, I think political pressure from the public must be quite different. So that's my argument. And if you have any suggestion for the potential cause of differences, let me know. I like to study this further. So this is the same with Fukushima. After Fukushima, what kind of lessons Japanese government learned and implemented something? That's my question, because that was my recommendation of Fukushima report, which is that transparency is a key, and also security is a key. And in these days, you know, the world become a bit more unstable, and we have many nuclear plants. So what are the factors? And also we have to do the policy of protecting nuclear plant from intentional attack, not necessarily operational sort of disaster. So that's my argument. And I think Japanese establishment may not wish to listen to such an argument, but I think Mike's report, very impressive. And everybody are very much concerned about nuclear become a great target for everything. So that I think I went to Sweden and France and many places after I submitted the report. Everybody is concerned because world affairs become very unstable and how to protect this thing. Nuclear is great, but protection and learn from the disaster is a key. Thank you. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Professor Kurokawa. The opportunity of using the Fukushima accident and its consequences to open up the Japanese awareness of the rest of the world.
Right.
And the importance of good, transparent, factual
Yes.
policy and information is highlighted. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
As a part of that global perspective, we are now going to listen to Michael Schneider presenting the main content of the World Nuclear Industry Status Report. Michael, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen right away. So hopefully this is all working fine. First of all, I'd like to thank the teams of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and the Renewable Energy Institute for co-hosting this event and the terrific work they've been doing. I know how much work goes into the preparation of such an event. So a big thank you to all of them, and obviously also a special thanks to Tatsu Suzuki, who was on our team, but he was absolutely essential to putting this together. So just a quick presentation, introduction to the World Nuclear Industry Status Report that we've been publishing now for since 2007 on an annual basis. The basic idea is to put together an international interdisciplinary team that is able to do a multi-indicator analysis. So we're proud to have researchers and experts from a number of very high-profile research institutions like the Harvard Kennedy School, like my colleague for all of the reports, Anthony Froggatt from Chatham House, but also from the Technical University in Berlin and the University of British Columbia in Canada. So really a broad range of research institutions and specializations. We're also proud to have a couple of artist designers, as you can see on the cover page. We're very grateful to their contributions, whether it's on graphics or on art. So we will have bio slides for every one of the speakers, which you can look at after. So we make it very short in terms of introduction of the speakers. They will be made available, the PowerPoints will be made available to all of the participants, so no worries that you get all of the information. So I'm jumping right into the presentation itself. Here we have the nuclear electricity generation starting in 1985, going to 2020. We see that we've had this increase, then we had a maximum historically in 2006. We had this decline post 3/11, and then it started increasing again until the 2019, and we've seen this very major drop, close to 4% in 2020. That is sort of a rupture from the trend that we had seen before. At the same time, if we're looking at the role of China, we see that China has been dominating here the numbers over the past 10 years. And it's very clear that if we take China out of the picture, it becomes clear that the development has been stagnating over the past decade in the rest of the world. In fact, the electricity generation dropped by over 5% outside China and dropped back to the lowest level since 1995. If we're looking at the share of nuclear power in the commercial electricity generation worldwide, it peaked in 1996 and dropped ever since. And it stands in 2020 at just over 10%. If we're looking at startup and closures, just for information, a startup for us is grid connection and a closure is grid disconnection. So what we've seen in 2021, so here we have the first figures of the year, we had seen 6 startups. It's interesting to mention that at the beginning of the year, we had actually expected the startup of 16 nuclear reactors throughout the year, according to the forecasts of the nuclear industry. Only 6 made it at the end of the year, of which 3 in China, 1 in Pakistan, but built by Chinese industry, 1 in India, and 1 in the United Arab Emirates. We had seen on the other side 8 closures, and actually 2 additional closure announcements in the UK. So that makes it a net of 10 closures. They are accounted for in earlier years because they had not generated any power in the year of 2021. So we've seen in Germany 3 closures that made some headlines, and 3 closure announcements in the UK, plus closures in Pakistan, Russia, Taiwan, and the United States. Again, if we look at the picture without China, we see that from the 1980s, from the late 1980s on, it's been a very flat development with, obviously a very major impact of the events in Fukushima. Again, this line here is becoming larger and larger because more and more reactors that have not generated power since then are definitely taken off the grid. So if we look at new connections to the grid over the past decade, 2011 to 2021, we had 69 startups and 69 closures, but of the startups, 40 took place in China. So outside China, we actually have a net decline of 40 nuclear reactors outside China. If we're looking at the number of operating reactors, we see this uninterrupted rise until the end of the 1980s, this flat development, the rupture here through the Fukushima events, and the slight increase. In 2021, we have seen 1 additional reactor compared to the status 1 year earlier. But while the installed capacity has been increasing over the past decade, there is a slight decrease for the first time in 2021. It's interesting because in 2020, we had seen a slight increase in capacity, but 1 reactor less put into operation than closed. It's the opposite in 2021, where we have a slight decline in capacity, while there is 1 additional reactor considered in operation. If we look at reactors under construction, we see this peak in 1979, and at 234 units. At the end of 2021, we have 55 units listed as under construction. We need to stress here that a lot of these plants, about 1 in 8, are actually listed as under construction at some point, but are not completed. So they're abandoned in the course of construction. This concerned about 1 in 8 reactors that have been listed as under construction at any point in time. Who is building? There's no surprise here. It's China with 20 units, by far the largest. If we look at India, that has 8 reactors under construction, you take both together, it's 28. So it's more than half of the reactors listed as under construction in the world are in 2 countries, in China and in India. one comment here, obviously we see that a lot of these projects have been delayed from original planning. We can document at least 30 cases of 55 where there are major delays. And if you see the startup of construction, some of them date back to the 1970s and 1980s. So obviously there have been major delays in these projects. We always look at the reactors that have been connected to the grid over the previous decade. So this is 2011 to 2020, 63 reactors connected, of which 37 in China, 10 in Russia. And we see an average of about 10 years, the time between construction start and grid connection. However, we also see that there's this huge difference between cases by a factor of 10, from around 4 years to over 40 years for the case of the United States Watts Bar 2 reactor. Now we look at construction starts, and what we see here is that the peak, historic peak, took already place in 1976 with 44 reactors, and then we had the steep decline to zero in 1995, and then there was an increase again until the year before 3/11 with 15 construction starts. Let me say here that the term construction start is used for the beginning of the concreting of the foundations of the reactor building. So everything that is done prior to that event is not considered in the time of the construction. It becomes increasingly debatable because a lot of work is actually done before the concreting of the foundations of the base slab of the reactor building takes place. So we see in 2010, there were 15 starts, of which 10 in China. And we have seen this evolution very much dominated by China. 2021, 10 construction starts. That's a lot more than what we've seen in the twice as many as in 2020. However, again, the domination is clear here with China, 6. If we take China out, there is 4 remaining, and we see this very low number of reactor construction starts around the world. It's also interesting to note that these 4 reactors are actually built by the Russian industry, of which 1 at home, and 3 outside the country, of which 2 in China and 1 in Turkey. This is sums up the status of the nuclear industry worldwide. China is building at home, and Russia is building especially in other countries. Now, if we look at the evolution of the age of the reactor fleets, we take here the top 5 reactor fleets in the world. China is the only one that has been remaining flat and below 10 years of the age. South Korea is already above 20 years now. Russia is the only country that has managed to decrease the average age over the past few years, mainly by shutting down the oldest reactors in the fleets and starting up new ones. We look at France, now exceeding 35 years of average age. We see that this country has actually increased the average age since the middle of the 1980s. And if we look at the United States, it's the same picture, now exceeding average age of 40 years of the reactor fleet. The world average is now exceeding 30 years on average. Now, every year we have focus chapters that look at specific issues. This is the first time we have been looking at climate change and the nuclear power role. So what is the resilience to climate change of nuclear power? This is from a case study on France. Only a few points here. We see that there have been a lot of outages identified due to climate effects, whether it's temperature or flow rate. So in 2020, it was more flow rate as an origin. In 2019, it was more temperature induced. It's up to 2,300 reactor hours lost in a year. So that's relatively minor compared to other origins, but it can be very significant for short-term impact on the available capacity, showing here up to 6.2 gigawatts, which is roughly 10% of the installed capacity in France. We also see that if we look at during the year, it's not so much the summer months of July and August as the months of September. And we see the domination of flow rate as an origin of impact rather than temperature. Very interesting first results. Now, further to give you an idea what's going on in France, it's remarkable to see that while there has been an increase in nuclear generation until 2005, we see very problematic developments, especially over the past few years, with a dramatic drop close to 12% in 2020, and the lowest share of nuclear power in the electricity mix since 1985. The reason is that the unavailability of nuclear reactors has been increasing dramatically. In 2020, the average outage at zero generation of electricity was 115 days per reactor. So that's roughly a third of the time that on average these reactors have been at zero production. You see that the difference is enormous between the individual reactors, but all of the 56 reactors were affected, and the lowest level was 3.5 Ds. The highest level was the full year. So what we're seeing now in 2021, this is the situation in 2020. What we're seeing in the monthly generation of nuclear power in 2021 is that we have here, the gray area is the range of 2012 to 2019. We see this line here is the year 2020. So we see this deep dive in the summer months, but which is not so problematic because the peak load in France is in winter, not as in Japan in summer. And so we see that the dotted line 2021 is very flat and shows a very problematic situation in the middle of winter, the lowest over the past decade, which led to this situation, which is this is the cross-border electricity trading from France. And as you can see here, the map of France, and you see that at this day, the 22nd of December, France has been importing electricity from all of the neighboring countries. And the total reached up to 13 gigawatts, 13 gigawatts. So that is like something like 10 very large reactors. And it's interesting to see that over 60% came from the nuclear phase-out countries, Germany and Belgium. Now, a week ago, on the 14th of January, we had a dramatic situation at the stock market where EDF shares plunged by up to 23% at stock market opening. The main reason is double. On one hand, EDF expects lower power generation for 2022 by 10%, so lowered its expectation again compared to previous estimates. And the government forces EDF to sell 20% more to competitors in order to keep the prices for end consumers at a lower level. Well, upcoming general elections, presidential elections, looking for a gift to potential electorate. So one of the consequences is that credit rating agencies already downgraded EDF. Fitch did so already, and the other two, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, will likely do the same. Because of time, I will jump these two. We can come back to these at a later point in time if there are any questions specifically. I'll pass on the word to Tatsujiro Suzuki for his presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Professor Suzuki, please, the screen is yours.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me? This is Suzuki speaking from Nagasaki University. I will talk about the Japanese nuclear power industry. In the report, there is the section of Japan. There is a focus on Japan. Professor Sakiyama, who will speak after myself, will talk about Fukushima. I also refer to Fukushima and the expenditure. I shall try to share my slide. And this is my personal opinion, but starting with the summary of the status of Japan's nuclear power.
ありがとうございます。はい、見えました。大丈夫です。
Thank you. Thank you. Now my slide is shared. Thank you. 5 points. Across the world, we heard that there was a massive impact of Fukushima, but of course, the largest impact of Fukushima accident has in Japan, and the energy overall has changed hugely in Japan. Regarding nuclear energy itself, so far in Japan, nuclear was considered to be very stable. It was supposed to be most cheap and affordable, and it was supposed to be the main core power source, but all that has been uprooted. Not stable, not cheap, and no longer called the main power source. And number 3, after Fukushima, the government of Japan has issued 2 strategic energy plan, which is the nation's energy plan. Regarding the sentences related to nuclear energy, the Japanese government is inconsistent by itself. Based on the lessons from Fukushima, the government says Japan will reduce dependence on nuclear power as much as possible, but at the same time, it continues to speak that it will maintain it as a base load electricity source. These two cannot stand together. Both cannot be fulfilled at the same time, and there is inconsistency and ambiguity, and therefore the Japanese community is totally divided, agree or disagree, oppose or promote about nuclear energy, and the community is totally divided. Discussion going nowhere. In number 2, it says that nuclear energy is no longer the most reliable, no longer stable source, and not at all cheap, and no longer the main energy source. That is the status of nuclear energy as shown in number 2. But even if the dependence is reduced or maintaining it as a main power, there are issues that must be resolved. What
例がもちろん放射性廃棄物の処分の問題ですが、これも
has to be resolved is the nuclear waste disposal and about the reprocessed plutonium, what to do, and of course decommissioning of Fukushima. That is going to be a major issue. So whether we continue or discontinue nuclear, there are so many challenges and unresolved issues as is shown in number 4, and about how to view the nuclear energy. Unfortunately, the Japanese community's opinions are totally divided. The Japanese population no longer trusts anything. They don't know who or what to trust. So far, in terms of baseball, nuclear was the ace, so to say. But after Fukushima, the ace can no longer throw. In terms of football, the foot is broken. The soccer player, the main player, has a broken leg. So the baseball pitcher can no longer throw. I mean, the athlete himself or herself might say that he can throw or he can continue to play football. But there must be a health checkup. But that is not being conducted. That is not possible. There must be objective facts and information to assess the health of the industry. But according to the status report by Michael Schneider and his team, in Japan, we do not have the healthy system to collect objective information and to make assessment. I think this is the largest reason why the Japanese public simply cannot trust any information. Next page. These are some numbers. Until before Fukushima, there were 54 units, 48.9 gigawatt in operation. At the end of last year, it was only 10 reactors, 10 gigawatt, and the share was 26% before Fukushima, down to 3.9. Coal has increased, natural gas increased, and the largest increase was observed with renewable energy. Renewable is now the ace pitcher in terms of baseball. The public opinion by the population, those who say nuclear is necessary before Fukushima, close to 90%, that has dropped to 25%, nuclear should be maintained or expanded. The total of the Japanese people, 10% only. Those who say nuclear should be phased out or shut down immediately, the total of that is more than 50% of the Japanese people. So before and after Fukushima, these are the major changes in the Japanese public opinion. Next page. I am not going to read this total page, but these are some of the extracts from the Strategic Energy Plan of the government of Japan. Within the same document, regarding nuclear, the government talks about totally inconsistent positions. The third dot, for example, the third dot, this was in place from 2014. There is a so-called myth of safety that we should not forget even for a moment about falling into the so-called myth of safety, whether we have not forgotten. Here I have a big question because, as is indicated at the bottom of this page, Japan now is aiming for 2050 carbon neutrality, and in this, again, they mentioned that the nuclear is a growth sector. So a pitcher, an ace pitcher who has lost or hurt his or her shoulder, can this pitcher throw? Big question. In Michael Schneider's report, there are some data that I have referred to. Next page. This is the nuclear power generation capacity and the impact before and after Fukushima in Japan. So at one time, there was no nuclear power generation. So Japan managed to go non-nuclear at one time at least. Next page. And this page IAEA, according to IAEA statistics, including the brown part of the graph, these are the reactors purported to be officially operational, but according to Michael's report, long-term outage, the orange part, these are longer than 1 year out. So these have not contributed to power generation. If you knock out the orange, then from the energy mix, these should be removed. Long-term outage for more than 1 year, this cannot be counted as in operation. So this is trying to show the reality in terms of this graph. In Japan, officially there are 33 reactors, but the reality in Japan is very different. As I mentioned, the ace pitcher can no longer throw even a ball. But according to IA statistics, it looks as if there are 33 reactors in operation in Japan. Next page. This is the average age of the fleet, as Michael discussed earlier. This is about the Japanese fleet. And of course, Japanese reactors are becoming older, average 31 years. Within 10 years or so, in Japan, the license is up to 40 years, which means that going forward, many of the Japanese reactors will have to be decommissioned. Either licenses extended, or without that, the number of reactors will shrink and the life will shorten. Thank you very much for your attention. I will pass over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Suzuki, again emphasizing the importance of honest, transparent, factual information, which was also a key topic of Professor Kurokawa's introduction. I will now hand over the screen and the floor to Professor Sakiyama to tell us more about the consequences of Fukushima in reality and on people. Professor Sakiyama, the screen is yours.
I would like to talk about the health effects of nuclear accidents, especially centering on pediatric thyroid cancer and the high incidence of this. That will be the core of my talk. This diagram shows that iodine, which is one of the causes of thyroid cancer, and how iodine had spread in the area. Iodine contaminated a large area, but the central government conducted thyroid screening only for Fukushima prefecture. So please move to the next screen. The next screen, please. Now, in order to prevent radioiodine from reaching the thyroid, the Nuclear Safety Commission wanted to issue instructions for the ingestion of iodine tablets. Now, the Nuclear Safety Commission sent the message to the off-site center and the governor, but the facts never got to them. And as a result of this, well, in such cases, the governor should have taken the initiative to issue instructions for the ingestion of iodine tablets, but the governor was not very aware. So as a result, the instruction never reached the local mayors. Miharu town and 3 towns took their own initiatives and issued instructions for the ingestion of iodine tablets. But only around 10,000 actually took the tablets. Please move to the next slide. The next slide, please. Now, it was known that at the Chernobyl accident, there was a large increase in incidence of pediatric thyroid cancer. So the Fukushima prefecture at started thyroid screening for those that were 18 and under at the time of the accidents, and children, fetuses, 380,000 patients were screened. And the screening was such that up to age 20, the screening was done every 2 years. And after that, it was conducted every 5 years in the milestone year of 5 years. Now, in the first screening, if there's a nodule of 5.1 millimeters or over, the person is sent to second screening. And when deemed necessary, diagnosis is conducted by through histological tissue examination. And as a result of this, if it is judged that the cancer is malignant, or it's a case of suspected malignancy, then it's reported to the Fukushima Review or Oversight Committee. However, as a result of histological tissue examination, if it is determined that there is no malignancy or suspected malignancy, then the case is sent to the standard care. And when the case is sent to standard care, even if in the follow-up observation, if there's a diagnosis of cancer, it's not reported to the Oversight Committee, and it's not made public. The information is not made public. Now, we see these cases where the cases are not captured in statistics, and at least 30 have evaded statistics. So it was lost from the statistics. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. The Oversight Committee announced up until October of last year the results of a thyroid screening. In the case of malignancy or suspected malignancy, up until now, there were 266. There were some cases where there was a determination of cancer as a result of surgical operation, which totaled 221. And there was one case of benign cancer. What we want to focus on here is that from the second round to the fourth round, those that were diagnosed as having cancer totaled 138. And of this, 46 were such that in the previous screening 2 years ago, they were judged and rated A1, where there was no abnormalcy. Now, what that means is that in 2 years, at least, the cancer increased in size by 5.1 millimeters. And it shows that thyroid cancer proliferates at a very high speed. And a considerable number of cases show these characteristics. Now, the Oversight Committee looked at the number of 115 for the first round and 71 for the second round. And they said that the incidence rate is several dozens greater than the ordinary case. And so they decided to do an analysis of correlation between incidence rate and exposure dose. Next slide, please. Now, thyroid exposure dose was such that there was only data for 1,080 people. It was not very reliable. So the dose was estimated based on the contamination of the habitat at the time of the incident. If you look at the diagram A, it shows that segmentation has been done in the order of contamination from higher to lower, evacuation area to Nakadori Road and Hamadori and Aizu. So there was segmentation into 4 districts. In the first round, there was no correlation established. So they announced that the high incidence cannot be conceived of as being the result of radiation. Now, the bottom graph in diagram A shows the results of the second round, where there's a high contamination, there's high incidence, and there's a correlation, which is shown here. After this was resolved, the Oversight Committee changed the segmentation. When there was no correlation, they did not change the segmentation, but as soon as they saw the correlation, they changed the segmentation. 2013, based on the 2013 UNSCARE dose estimate, they redrew the lines, and the segmentation was changed as shown in diagram B. And the target of the screening was such that they excluded those 5 years and under, and they grouped the targets into 2 age groups from 6 to 14 and those 15 and over. And they did an analysis based on this. And as shown in the graph under diagram B, the correlation was lost. And in addition to this, with regard to those 15 and older, the higher the dose, the lower the carcinogenicity or incidence rate. So it's totally the opposite finding of what the findings that were seen before, but no explanation was offered. And the Oversight Committee ignored diagram A, where there was correlation, and based on diagram B, they said that it's not conceivable that the high incidence rate is related to radiation. And they said that there's a large number of cancers which were detected, not leading to clinical diagnosis later, which would not lead to death later on. So there was a case of overdiagnosis. Now, in order to prevent overdiagnosis, or based on the pretext of preventing overdiagnosis, they're trying to reduce thyroid screening. Now, there are lots of papers that establish a correlation between radiation and incidence of thyroid cancer using data which was published by the Oversight Committee, but the Oversight Committee has ignored this completely. And the 2020 UNSCARE report makes no mention of the cases which were not captured in the statistics. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, this is the last slide. Moving away from the issue of health effects, deaths due to earthquake and tsunami, and also disaster-related deaths. We have drawn a comparison between the two. Now, the disaster-related deaths nationwide is 3,784, and two-thirds, or over two-thirds, is accounted for by Fukushima Prefecture. Fukushima Prefecture has less deaths due to earthquake and tsunami compared to Iwate Prefecture and Miyagi Prefecture, by far lower. But the disaster-related deaths is several-fold greater than Iwate Prefecture and Miyagi Prefecture. And this, I believe, suggests the permanent uniqueness of radiation disasters. That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, a reminder of how important it is to provide accurate, factual, and honest information in order to gain public credibility. I will now hand over the screen to Anthony Froggatt to talk about the competitiveness of nuclear in relation to the evolving renewable energy technologies. Anthony, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm calling from London, so it is a great pleasure to be able to present to people around the world, in particular in Japan today. So as Thomas said, I just want to talk through some of the key issues around nuclear versus renewables. And why this is important is, as we all know, we need to decarbonize the energy sector. Climate change is probably the most significant problem facing the world today. And the energy sector is the major contribution of greenhouse gases. So unless we can decarbonize and decarbonize rapidly, then the consequences of climate change are going to increase significantly. So that is what the framing that I'd like to give to you today. So in terms of these slides, the first one just indicates the extent to which investment is being made into different energy sources. The line along the bottom shows the investment in nuclear power. And this is it has been done on the basis of when decisions have been taken to start construction. So it is in a particular year, the amount of money that is invested in the start of construction. And for the renewable energy, this is the extent to which similar investment, the start of construction is taking place in these different energy sources. And what we can see here is over the last 15 years or so, there is a rapid divergence, so that total investment within the non-hydro renewables, so not including large hydro, is now around $300 billion per year, compared to roughly around 30 billion. So an order of magnitude difference between the investment taking place in renewables versus nuclear power. As you can see, over the last few years, a stagnation of investment in renewables. And I just want to highlight that, but I'll come back to it at a later date. But obviously, this is making a huge difference in terms of what decarbonisation is taking place within the energy sector. Next slide, please. And what we see here is the consequence of those investments. So this is the electricity being produced by different sources. And we can see just a massive growth over the last decade. So in particular, we can see that wind has increased around 4-fold, solar around 8-fold, and that the total output from nuclear power is around static during this time. And of course, what we also see here is a key tipping point, is in 2019, the total electricity coming from renewables has overtaken that of nuclear power. And given the previous trends that we saw in the graph in terms of investment, this divergence is just set to increase as we go forward. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in the first slide, we saw a rough stagnation of total investment within the renewable sector. But this doesn't mean the total volume of renewables coming onto the grid has remained static. This is because what we are seeing is significant falling in costs in the electricity being produced, and therefore the investment needed to get any single kilowatt hour of electricity. And as we see here again, it's from comparing 2009 to 2020, and this is a study coming from Lazard's, and it relates just to the United States. But we can see here that the solar costs in 2009 were around 3 times more than nuclear power. But if you then go forward to 2020, solar costs are around 8 times less that of nuclear power. So a total shift, a total transformation in what we can expect in terms of the costs of technology. And this becomes a virtuous circle. So as we see more and more renewables coming on grid, we see lowering costs and therefore more investment in these technologies. And that is why the nuclear costs is largely static. We are not seeing significant costs of new construction. We're not seeing learning by doing. We're not seeing economies of scale, where the reverse is true of the renewable energy sector. So next slide, please. Sorry, just lights were going off automatically. And so this is just an important graph because it shows the trends going forward. And this is taken from the International Energy Agency. So looking forward to 2050, and 2050 is a key date, not only because it's mid-century, but because this is when a large number of countries have now pledged to have net zero. So overall no greenhouse gas emissions from their society as a whole. And we can see that, again, their forecasts are that over the next 30 years, the costs of nuclear power, so in purple, are falling very slightly, around 7%. But we compare that to established industries like the onshore wind is 14%, solar continuing to fall by around 60%. But then interestingly there we have offshore wind, which is really seen as a new technology, is getting more and more established. For example, in the UK, just this week, the government in Scotland announced that it would be building, or is opening up to tender, 25 gigawatts of new offshore wind, which would provide, if all built, would provide enough power to provide electricity for 23 million homes. And there's around 27 million homes in the UK. So a really major source of renewable energy, and this is being opened up to tender. So it really is a remarkable situation that it is anticipated that within the next 10 years, the prices of solar and renewables really do continue to fall while nuclear is static. Next slide, please. So just a couple of examples of what on the national level. As Michael mentioned, in terms of China, China really is the global leader in terms of construction of new nuclear. So 20 of 55 reactors around the world are being built in China. But yet its contribution, although it is increasing, and as we can see here in the purple line, it has been quite significant, and this is not replicated in any other country around the world. But the growth within non-hydro renewables, and again, it's important to stress this is non-hydro renewables. China has a massive hydro fleet, has exceeded that. And we can see here in terms of blue, the extent to which wind still, it's producing more power than renewables, and the absolutely extraordinary growth in solar over the last 5 years or so in China. As we can see here, from 2010, around 1 terawatt hours of solar power to 260 today. So China is the leader in renewables, not only in terms of its deployment, but of course is a major exporter of these technologies around the world, and is one of the reasons why we are seeing such rapid falls in production costs and then levelized cost of electricity around the world, is because production from China, India, etc., has become so cheap. Next slide, please. And this is just the European Union. Again, important to show the extent to which nuclear is declining. And as we saw from many of Michael's figures, that is a combination of political phase out, but also increasingly the phase out of nuclear power for technical reasons and economic reasons. As was mentioned in the UK, we are seeing an accelerated closure of reactors because they are becoming too costly to operate, given the technical needs to keep them going with the aging problems that they're facing. So nuclear is declining, and we are seeing this significant growth in renewable energy. And again, an important crossover last year is the deployment of, or the production from renewable energies has not only overtaken nuclear, but has now overtaken fossil fuels. And it's probably just worth mentioning a key issue, and I noticed that within the chats that we've seen coming up over the last couple of months, is the question of the taxonomy. So the EU has produced a framework about investment in sustainable energy, and they have included nuclear and natural gas within that. And this is creating a controversial proposal from the European Commission. It is still to be debated and approved by the member states and the European Parliament. And it is also sends important signals both to the investment community, but also the investment community will send important signals back to the European Commission and the EU. And there is really strong signals of opposition for this because people see that it undermines the development of sustainable energy and in particular renewable energy. So this is something to watch over the months ahead. And then the final slide is just to highlight, again, because Michael mentioned the extent to which India is an important player in terms of the deployment of or the construction of new nuclear power plants. Its growth is in the renewable energy sector really, again, by nearly orders of magnitude, exceeds the nuclear sector. And this trend is set to continue as the falling costs show, people will invest in renewables rather than nuclear power in India, as in other countries around the world. So thank you very much indeed, and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Anthony. And now I give the floor back to Michael Schneider for a sum up.
Thank you very much, everyone. Again, I will not read the slide. You will have it sent to you. Let me make a couple of points, though. I am very concerned about the increasing gap between the perception of the nuclear sector from the media, from statements of decision makers, versus the reality. When you read the papers or listen to radio, watch the television, you can get the idea that this is a blooming industry. There's lots of reactors being built all over the place. Whereas, in fact, on the ground, the industrial reality is dramatically different. As we've seen over the past 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, we have had less reactors starting up than being closed, while there was a very minor increase in capacity in 2020. This turned negative in 2021. It's very obvious that nuclear power has become entirely irrelevant to today's electricity capacity to build market. The investments go into renewables. It's very clear. In the estimates, the first estimates for 2021 are an addition of 290 gigawatts for renewables. So we see this huge difference. There's a decline in nuclear and there's a huge increase in renewables. That's not really the impression you can get from the media or from statements by decision makers. And I think that is a very serious issue. And I think we need to get back to fact-based analysis, and we try to contribute with this report to the status of facts and figures and data that should be the carpet for debate about the future of the energy sector internationally. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for contributing and participating in this.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for very good, interesting presentations. We now have about 30 minutes for questions and answers, and you can submit questions at the Q&A function in the Zoom. I have noted some questions already. There was one question after Michael's presentation about how the temperature affected nuclear generation, and I think I can answer that directly, saying that the temperature of the cooling water, the higher it is, the lower the efficiency of the power plants. But then also when temperatures get high enough, you may not be able to keep the safety criteria fulfilled, so you have to shut them down, or you may have environmental consequences of heating the cooling water reservoir further, so you have to shut down for environmental reasons. I think that's the explanation that's okay. There was a question on the taxonomy that I think Anthony addressed. And then we have some questions on the consequences at the Fukushima area to Professor Sakiyama. One was regarding the observations if the iodine distribution actually had a positive effect. Is it possible to say anything about that, Professor Sakiyama?
To what extent that impacted carcinogenicity or incidence epidemiologically to do research was not possible because not many took the iodine tablets and it has not been investigated. So I don't know is the answer.
Thank you. Another question all the way from northern Sweden was regarding the possible consequences of the radioactive pollutants released into the sea and the risks to people consuming fish caught in the nearby parts of the sea. A question that may be even more interesting when the enormous more than 1 million tons of water still containing quite a lot of radioactive hydrogen is to be released according to the plans. I don't know if Professor Suzuki or Sakiyama would like to comment on that question.
About the release into the ocean, the fishery community is fiercely opposed. And of course, the Japanese population, most of the Japanese people are opposed to release into the ocean. However, Tokyo Electric is trying to barge through and go forward with release into the ocean. But indeed, tritium, the radioactivity of tritium, the energy release is not large, and therefore the biological effect tends to be underestimated, undervalued. But after all, even at low exposure, it could accumulate and it would form into organic tritium. Organic tritium will accumulate in fish species, and therefore we have to be worried and concerned. And storage terrestrially is better, according to the public opinion by the local people. TEPCO and the government of Japan are trying to go to ocean release. Whether we can manage to stop them doing so, there is only the public opinion that can stop them.
Professor Suzuki, would you like to comment?
はい、トリチウム水と言
Thank
わ
you
れ
for the question. Yes, tritium contaminated water, but this is after processing the contaminated water and the tritium has remained. So what about any other substance other than tritium? The question is whether substances other than tritium has been removed. ALPS, the ALPS, Advanced Liquid Processing System, if it is really going to require 3 decades, whether the ALPS system is going to function for 30 years, if it does not work, we will have a big question that the radioactive substances other than tritium might remain. According to the plan, it is below the legal level, which means that there is some amount of radioactive substance remaining. It is not only tritium that is remaining, strictly speaking. So there must be more transparency, and there must be careful audit, test, inspection, monitoring about the activities.
Then a final question on the health effects, and that's regarding thyroid cancer in adults. We only heard about the effects on children, but would there not be effects also on adults?
Those 40 years of age and over, it was said that iodine tablets were needed for them. That is what is generally said. But I don't know about that. Actually, thyroid cancer was the cause of deaths for multiple deaths in Fukushima, and these were adults. Those died as a result of thyroid cancer. I know of them. So just because a person is an adult, Iodine we can't rule out iodine affecting thyroid. So there may be an increase in adult cases going forward. Actually, Chernobyl, in that case, there were adults at the time, and there's an increase of incidence of thyroid cancer among the adults. So that is something we have to consider in Japan as well.
Thank you. Professor Kurokawa.
Thank you. I'd like to say, I think, two things. One is treated water by Alps contains many other radioactive nucleotides. And you have to be transparent at that time because nobody talks about it in Japan, which is crazy. Because if it's not only tritium, that's you can throw this into the water. So that is the thing. You have to be transparency is the foundation of trust, wherever this is. So I think that is the fundamental psyche of Japanese government or STEPCO, whatever that is.
Unfortunately, not only Japanese authorities, the same thing applies in many other countries. Right. Now, Michael, a set of questions have occurred in the Q&A regarding small modular reactors, and I know that was one part of your report. Can you describe the situation and the prospects for small nuclear reactors?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's part of the sort of amazing communication effect that we're currently seeing. Like it's like a wonder word, SMR, small modular reactors. It seems like these little things that miraculously will be built all over the planet. But if we look at the actual industrial situation, it is as follows. There are currently 2 modular reactors operating in Russia. They're called often floating reactors because they have been built on a barge. Those are small 2 30 megawatt reactors, but the goal was to demonstrate they are easy to build, they're fast to build. So the target was 3.7 years building time. Reality was 12.7 years building time. So almost 4 times as long as planned, which is obviously one of the key problems of the nuclear industry, that they are not delivering on time. Now, if you don't deliver on time, you cannot deliver on budget. It's impossible because a big part of the costs are actually financing costs, and you have to come up with capital for a long time. So it's money is expensive, is getting more and more expensive. So that was one of the problems. The second problem is they came online in 2019, and they generated in 2020 for the first entire year, and the load factor, so the actual productivity for one was below 20%, and for the other one below 30%. So it took a long time to build them. It was not easy, it was expensive, and then they don't really operate as they should be operating. That's the only one ones in Russia. There's one reactor that has been reported to have been connected to the grid of 100 megawatts in China. That is a sort of a rebuild of a pebble bed modular reactor that the Germans had built in the 70s and 80s, and which was a pretty disastrous industrial experience in Germany. It's too early to see in China. However, the target was to build it quickly and cheaply, and the construction started in 2012. And we only have 1 of 2 connected to the grid now. So it took 10 years, roughly twice as long as was planned. So another failure to demonstrate the easy build and cheap build. The only other reactor that has gotten a generic license, that means that the design has been assessed by the safety authorities, that is in the US. It's the company NuScale. They started suggesting a design of 50 megawatts that was increased to 60 megawatts, got the generic license. And soon after, they announced that they would increase the capacity again to 77. And the standard design is to put 12 modules on the same site. Now, if you multiply 12 times 77, you're above 900 megawatts per site. So I don't really see what the difference is with another ordinary reactor site, except that, you know, historically, nuclear power comes from very small units. That's how nuclear history started in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they moved to large reactors for a very simple reason, is economy of scale. So to say now we restart nuclear history and we go back to small reactors definitely means per megawatt installed, it's much more expensive than what we have with large reactors. So there's no industrial real experience. There are no designs that are licensed anywhere on any site. There's no site. There's no prototypes that have been built by the French or the British or any others. So what are we talking about? We are talking about climate emergency on one hand, and on the other side, we see that these technologies, if ever, will be available in large numbers, maybe around 2040 or so, if ever. So much too late and much too expensive. And that should be the focus on options that are quick to establish, to reduce emissions, and that are cheap, fast and cheap. That's should be the target for any option to combat climate change.
Thank you. And we can remind ourselves also of the very experienced nuclear designer and project manager, Hyman Rickover, who talked about small reactors in a statement to the US Congress in 1970, where he said that these small, wonderful, cheap, easy to build reactors have the characteristics that they have not yet been built. Real reactors are something completely different, much more expensive and difficult. Professor Kurokawa-san. Cannot
You're
hear
muted.
you.
Professor Kurokawa, you're muted.
Still
Right.
can't hear you.
Really? This
Now
all
we
right?
can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Now
yeah,
we
yeah.
hear you.
Last two slides, I think. If you could, if somebody shows this thing. If not, I send it to you. So whatever the report, I think you can put this thing. That's a sort of all the dialogue which have been done over last year on,
Okay.
you know, like several things. So you can see that on the website. Thank you.
There are a question maybe to Anthony. Is it likely that nuclear will actually be included in the European Commission or European Union taxonomy, the sort of advised investment list? Can you comment that a bit further, Anthony?
Yes, thank you. But maybe just before addressing the taxonomy, I could just add one thing on the small modular reactor. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
The small modular reactors that Michael mentioned. It's about timing. And the UK government at the end of last year announced that by 2035, the UK would have a zero carbon electricity grid. So in the next 15 years. So the question is there an opportunity for small modular reactors to play a role in that? And the answer is probably no, just in terms of timing. They're still under development by Rolls-Royce and partners. So if the UK is to stick by its target, then by 2035, we will have no fossil fuels on the grid without small modular reactors. So it really is a urgency in terms of addressing decarbonisation. We know in terms of Glasgow that, and all the analysis around the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, they are inadequate for 2030. They will lead to a net increase in greenhouse gas emissions when we need to see a significant decrease. And therefore, we need to be rapidly changing the energy mix. And that will not be from small modular reactors that, as Michael said, are too slow and are still under design phase. So I would say that there is an urgency question. That is why we need to prioritize certain technologies. And that leads you into the question of the taxonomy. It is I would propose that the degree to which this is a controversial issue is highlighted by the fact that the European Commission released this on the 1st of January and said that there was 14 days for comment by the public, so that by the 14th of January, people had to put in comments. The European Parliament and the European Council have slightly longer. As to whether or not it will be adopted, the controversy is not just around nuclear. It is to include natural gas as well as nuclear power within this taxonomy. And I think up until now, there has been more concern from investors, for example, around the inclusion of natural gas. And I think the reason of that is obvious, is there are so few people looking to invest in new nuclear within the EU, that it is not seen as such an important issue. But it is absolutely crucial that this taxonomy does send the right signals, not only to markets, but to governments and to local authorities as to what are sustainable energy sources. I keep saying we don't have very much time. We have to address this urgent question of climate change, and being driven down a certain road because of political expedience or political desires, which do not relate to the realities of climate change and the realities of what people want to invest in, is a distraction and a dangerous distraction. So as to whether or not it will be adopted, I think we have to see. The EU is notorious for what's called horse trading. So this is a serious political level that is being dealt with at heads of state level, and we'll have to see over the coming weeks as to whether or not they're adopted. But I think the key issue is, I think the investors and the investment community will reject both of these proposals, that nuclear and natural gas be included within their green investments. And I think this will undermine the European Commission's taxonomy. And I think that is the real shame about the current situation. Thank you.
Michael, please.
Yeah, just to add, you know, I have to admit that when I saw this draft version that was leaked of the taxonomy specifications, I was really surprised to find in there not only the actual investments that would be, you know, labeled sustainable in new nuclear power, but actually lifetime extensions are included in the draft. So, I mean, this is quite remarkable if you think about it, that to have actual investments labeled as green and sustainable under the taxonomy that includes, you know, lifetime extensions of 40, 50-year-old reactors. So that is likely to reach more effective clients, if I may say so, in existing nuclear reactors and their operators that are under great financial stress right now than any nuclear new build would ever attract. So I think that the lifetime extension part of the taxonomy is particularly concerning at this point.
Thank you. I'm not sure we should spend more time on this European taxonomy because it will not in any major way affect the profitability of these investments, where Anthony has already described the great advantage that has now come to renewables. But I would like to raise another question that has been in the Q&A function here, and that is regarding the Japanese plans for nuclear waste management. In other parts of the world, there is deep geological storages proposed, and sometimes planning has gone quite far. But Japan has geological conditions that are not particularly suitable for this. Maybe Professor Suzuki-san and Kurokawa-san can comment on these Japanese plans and on the costs to Japan. Suzuki-san first, maybe?
はい。現状はご指
Thank
摘の通り、
As you have correctly mentioned,
Sorry. 現状はご指摘の通り
as you have correctly mentioned, there is no clear plan. In 2000, the legislation was made. By 2045, there was supposed to be a disposal site, but 20 years after the legislation, no plan has advanced. In a nutshell, today's theme is there is lack of reliability, no trust in the government plan. Science Council of Japan has issued a recommendation calling for amendment of the Japanese government plan, but a third-party organization to be used to raise reliability, that has not been listened to, that has not been accepted. In Japan, whether there is a stable geological site, it has not been decided. The government says it will continue with the plan, though. Very unfortunately, there is no trustworthy plan at the moment. This is my personal observation.
Professor Kurokawa-san? Cannot hear you.
Sorry. I think this generation created nuclear energy as a CO2-free one, but to the subsequent generation, what kind of a message we're going to leave? So one question is not only safety, but where to spend fuel will be buried. That we have to make something for the future generations. Otherwise, our generation will be remembered forever as a generation of great atomic energy creation, but leaving all the spent fuel without any plan on this issue. So that might become my legacy.
Yeah. Another question, of course, is regarding the waste from renewable energy technologies. Used solar panels, old wind power plants that have to be decommissioned. Maybe Anthony would like to comment on those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I can talk to in great depth, but I can talk about general principles. I mean, I think what we are seeing is obviously the rise in renewable energy, and this is leading to greater experience in terms of construction, so construction efficiency and material efficiency. And I think as we move forward, and as we are starting to see now, the decommissioning of existing renewables, then we will get more experience about how to manage these wastes and how to recycle these wastes. So absolutely, it is an issue. And it, at least for me, it highlights the need for us to be aware of the importance of energy efficiency, of not assuming that we will just renewable our way out of all of these problems. Unless we reduce the overall level of consumption of energy, then the environmental consequences, be it CO2, be it nuclear waste, be it material shortages, be it disposal of materials in general, will become more and more acute. So we mustn't underestimate the importance of understanding the full environmental life cycle costs of renewables. But I think it is something that I hope that we improve. But Thomas, I don't know if this is an area that you have also looked at in more depth than me.
I think I would like, if I had the question, I would be a bit more ambitious, because what we see is that the renewable energy industry has been thinking about this already before starting their operations. And with wind power plants, most of the wind power plant is made out of steel and copper and metals that are valuable as resources, even when the wind power plant has reached its end of lifetime. There has been a bit of discussion about the turbine blades, but now both the manufacturers of wind power plants and power companies deploying them are ensuring that they will be fully recycled and even some of the material reused as they are. And the main difference compared to the nuclear waste is that the renewable energy industry technologies will not make new dangerous materials. It's materials that can be recycled in a way that the new elements produced in nuclear reactors cannot. So I think there is a significant difference. I see Suzuki-san nodding on that question, but one question that is not addressed explicitly in this discussion is the risks of nuclear fuel, spent nuclear fuel being used for military purposes and the nuclear weapon proliferation risks. And I know that is one of Suzuki-san's concerns. Can you give us 2 minutes on how you see that risk?
Yes, thank you very much. I think the reprocessing of spent fuel recover plutonium, which is the bomb material, and it's accumulating worldwide. More than 300 tons of plutonium recovered from civilian spent fuel, and we have to stop reprocessing to reduce such stockpile of plutonium. One question actually regarding the China. Chinese is now planning to build 2 reprocessing plants, which will not be under international safeguards. Then their plutonium could be used to increase the nuclear weapons capability in China. So I think the worldwide efforts to discourage reprocessing is very important in terms of global security.
Thank you. And another related risk factor that we have been made aware of in Northern Europe, in Sweden in particular, in the last few days, is that nuclear reactors themselves might be military targets, where the consequences of weapon attacks against reactors will be very severe. As a result, they are protected, and you're not allowed to fly over them and distribute details about how the reactors are designed and the layout and so on. But recently, in this period with increased conflicts between Russia and other Northern European countries, we have just had drones flying, large drones flying over the nuclear reactors, which has caused a lot of concern. This is certainly an issue. This seminar is now coming to an end, and I have the task of trying to sum up what we have heard during these 90 minutes. And I think the main message that was echoed by several speakers, and in particular by Professor Kurokawa in the beginning, was that this is a field where the credibility and the rational societal democratic decision-making will rely on honest, factually correct and open information being made available. And we have heard several examples during this day of information that has been in different ways hidden regarding the consequences of Fukushima accident, regarding the status of nuclear power and the risks involved. And this seminar is one attempt to try to provide information. You should never claim that everything you say is perfectly correct and true, but you should be open to this scientific dialogue trying to establish what is correct. And this event is an attempt to contribute to that societal discourse on energy and nuclear risk issues in Japan and in the world. And I think we should all be grateful to the major effort that Michael Schneider and his co-workers have done in providing facts about the nuclear industry that the nuclear industry itself may not be so keen to disseminate globally. But that has been a major contribution to a factual, fact-based discussion about the role of nuclear power in reducing the risks of unmanageable climate change. I would like to thank all the participants, all the speakers, first of all, and all the participants for joining this event. Again, I can repeat that the presentations and even the video of this event will be made available in a couple of weeks' time. The Renewable Energy Institute website will be one way of finding it. So again, thank you very much. Thank you very much in particular, Professor Suzuki-san, for elegant cooperation in preparing this event, and to Professor Kurokawa, Sakiyama-san, and Anthony and Michael for contributing. Thank you all. All the best. Thank you.